Hello everyone and welcome to Hockey Up. I'm Brennan and today we're doing another team preview and we're looking at the Boston Bruins. Now the Boston Bruins had a massive regular season in 2019-2020, winning the President's Trophy, but they did lose in the second round to the Tampa Bay Lightning. The season before that, the Boston Bruins went to the Stanley Cup Finals and lost to the St. Louis Blues. So Boston is always in there in the mix as a cup contender and has been a very good team for a very long time. But that being said, their core is getting older and there is a sense of maybe one last run with this team. So I do have my questions on whether or not time is running out for the Boston Bruins. But we're going to start off with what they added. Now, as of the time that I'm recording this video, Boston hasn't added a lot. They did add a depth guy in Craig McKegg, not really a big deal there, but a really good under-the-radar signing in Craig Smith. I think Craig Smith is going to fit perfectly in Boston's top six. He brings a strong two-way game, which the Boston Bruins really value, to go along with a little bit of goal-scoring upside, being a consistent 20-goal scorer over an 82-game schedule these past few years. I think that getting Craig Smith on a decent contract was a really good move for Don Sweeney and the Boston Bruins, and I think Bruins fans are really going to like what Smith brings to the lineup. Now there is some notable subtractions here for the Boston Bruins. They did lose a depth guy in Joakim Nordstrom, not really a big loss there, but two big losses on the blue line in Zdeno Chara and Torrey Krug. Now Zdeno Chara has been captain of the Boston Bruins for what feels like forever, and despite the fact that there was rumors that he might return, he ended up going to the Washington Capitals. I think that's really weird, and I know a lot of Bruins fans are upset about that. Chara's kind of been the face of that franchise for quite some time, and even though he is not the defenseman he once was, he's still effective in a bottom pairing utility role and is still a good leader and was a great leader for the Boston Bruins. We saw this in the Stanley Cup Finals when he played with a broken jaw. I think that his number will be retired in Boston and he's a for sure Hall of Famer. So even though he's not returning to Boston for what's likely his last year, Bruins fans can rest assured that Chara will always be remembered as a Bruin. And then the loss of Torrey Krug is actually a pretty big one. Torrey Krug is one of the best pure offensive defensemen in the NHL, and the fact that they didn't really sign anybody yet to replace him is pretty concerning for Bruins fans. I get that having Charlie McAvoy is going to step up some of his offense, to replace Krug, but that being said, I don't know if McAvoy is going to be able to replace all of Krug's offense. Krug is a true power play quarterback, and even though his 5-on-5 game isn't exactly the best, Krug still was good on the special teams and was a very valuable offensive force from the blue line. Now Boston still boasts one of the best top sixes in the NHL, but outside of a couple guys, their top six is getting a lot older. As I said previously, I think Craig Smith fits into that top six quite nicely. I think he's going to bring a strong two-way game with some goal scoring, and I think David Krejci is still likely the second line center. Krejci's been a solid player, and even though his contract is a little bit cumbersome, he does only have 1 year left on his deal, so it's going to be interesting to see if the Boston Bruins decide to lock him up or not. There's also Jake DeBrusk, who was a restricted free agent signed to a short-term bridge deal. I really like DeBrusk's overall game. I think he's a very good forward for Boston and a guy that kind of goes under the radar. I think DeBrusk is going to be a guy that has to lead Boston into this new wave, after guys like Bergeron and Marchand are done, and obviously Chara going out now. So I think that DeBrusk is a key piece for the Bruins moving forward. And then there's that ever dangerous perfection line for the Boston Bruins of Marchand, Bergeron, and Pastrnak. Now that top line is probably the best in the NHL to this day. Bergeron is one of the best two-way centers in the NHL. He's got 4 Selke trophies, and in my opinion is probably the greatest two-way forward of all time. I still think that Bergeron is a very valuable asset and is still a true top-line center and probably a top 10 center in the league still. So Bergeron's fantastic, but so is Brad Marchand. Marchand has been great for these past few years, and despite being a pest and a hated player within the NHL community, if you're a Boston fan, chances are you love him. He gets under the other team's skin, he draws penalties, he does take some penalties, but that being said, definitely draws more than he takes, and his offense cannot be disputed. Marchand is over a point per game player and is a consistent threat to push for 40 goals and get 80 to 90 points. He did have a 100-point season mixed in there as well. And then there's David Pastrnak, who I think is still the best pure offensive threat on this Boston Bruins team. I do think that David Pastrnak is likely going to get another Maurice Richard trophy in his career. He already had one as he tied with Alex Ovechkin this past season. So I think that Pastrnak is always a goal-scoring threat and is going to be a point-per-game guy in his career. He's a truly fantastic offensive talent, and his two-way game, while is probably the weakest on his line, still is average for an elite point-producing player. So I think that Pastrnak is one of the best wingers in the league, and once he gets healthy, he's probably going to cement that again this season. Now, the top four for the Boston Bruins took a massive hit this offseason, and I have serious questions about their top four in all honesty. Looking at it on paper, I think their defense is probably bottom 10 in the NHL, and while they do play with a good team identity, and I'm sure that they'll play a little bit above their heads, it's kind of weird for Boston to have a not-so-great defense on paper. As far as the fourth guy in this top four, I put Kevin Miller in there. I'm not really sure if he fits in there too well. He has been injured these past few seasons, but if he's able to stay healthy, maybe he can be a useful addition to that top four. But then Brandon Carlo, Matt Grzelcyk, and Charlie McAvoy are all good defenders in their own right. Charlie McAvoy is actually a really good defender, definitely a top pairing guy, and is one of the best young defensive defensemen in the NHL to go along with a pretty good offensive game. I do think that McAvoy's offensive numbers are going to take a step forward this offseason, as he's likely going to get top unit power play time. But then Matt Grzelcyk is kind of an underrated defenseman as well. He was given out a big contract recently, and I think that he's going to be able to live up to that in an expanded role with the Boston Bruins. Grzelcyk is definitely an underrated defenseman, and if you don't pay that much attention to hockey, it was probably a little confusing to see him get that big of a contract. But that being said, if Grzelcyk can play up to his potential, then he's probably worth it. And then Brandon Carlo is another really good shutdown defender. Carlo brings a strong physical game, and while there isn't a lot of offense there is a little bit, but you're more so looking at the defensive side of things with Carlo. So this top four, there's a lot of questions here, and I think they could definitely benefit from adding a defender this offseason. They have been linked to guys like Sami Vatanen, but I'm not sure if that's going to happen. They're definitely going to rely on Charlie McAvoy to be the guy for them, as he is fantastic. Thankfully for the Boston Bruins, they still boast one of, if not the best goaltending tandem in the NHL with Yaroslav Halak and Tuukka Rask. That being said, both these guys only have 1 year left on their deals, and they are aging goaltenders, so this might be the last year that they go with that tandem, but they're still going to be good for this season. I know there has been questions about Tuukka's play, but he was a Vezina nominee this past year, and although he didn't look great in the bubble for his couple games he played, he did end up leaving, but then Halak came in, and it's not like Halak played bad. Halak was not the reason why Boston lost to Tampa. Halak played admirable, but obviously I don't think Halak is a true starter in the NHL. But these guys still make for one of the best tandems in the NHL, and is probably going to bail out that defense a lot of times. When it comes to the best players for the Boston Bruins, you definitely have to look at that perfection line of Pastrnak, Marchand, and Bergeron. Those three guys are some of the best forwards in the NHL. Obviously, Bergeron still being one of the best two-way forwards, Marchand being an absolute point-producing pest of a winger, and David Pastrnak being one of the best offensive goal-scoring threats there is. I think Charlie McAvoy gets in here as well as one of the brightest young defenders in the NHL. I think McAvoy is going to get even more attention this season since he's kind of the only big notable name on that Boston blue line, and then I still think that Tuukka Rask is a good part of this core. Tuukka Rask, we just talked about, still one of the best goaltenders in the NHL. Going to be interesting to see if his head is still in the game, though. But this core 5 is really good. It's been a contentious core 5 for a while, and it makes sense why Boston's always been a good team. They've made Stanley Cup Finals runs, and it makes sense when you've got a core this good. But then getting into some interesting players for the Boston Bruins. Now to start off, I want to talk about the injury situation with David Pastrnak. Now David Pastrnak is reported to be out till at least February, which, could be, or actually the middle of February, which could be an entire month of the season. And a condensed schedule, that could really sink the Boston Bruins. I still think that Boston will likely get by without Pastrnak for a bit, but if Pastrnak is out long term, that's really going to hurt Boston. It has been reported that he is actually ahead of schedule, and he could be looking for a return on February 1st, which would still mean that he, misses a few weeks in the first part of the season, which I do think will be a big blow to the Bruins lineup, as I feel Pastrnak is probably their best forward at this point. But that being said, I think that Boston still has the forward depth to kind of get past that loss of Pastrnak, but they're definitely going to want him back sooner rather than later. And then I want to talk about Patrice Bergeron, and that I think Bergeron is the easy pick for the next captain of the Boston Bruins. It's kind of surprising that Bergeron hasn't been a captain for a while, but with Chara being there for what feels like forever, it kind of makes sense why Bergeron has been limited to that assistant captain role. But now that Chara's gone, I think that Bergeron is the obvious choice to wear the C for the Boston Bruins. Bergeron has been a Bruin his entire career. He is getting older. He's probably looking at a little bit of a decline, but that being said, he's still a leader in that locker room. He's still a class act, and is the obvious choice for captain of the Boston Bruins. If it goes to anybody else, I'm going to be shocked, in all honesty. Then I want to talk about Tuukka Rask. Now, Tuukka Rask is still one of the best goaltenders in the NHL, but for how long? As I think he might end up retiring after this season, in all honesty. He's only got 1 year left on his deal, and it's been reported that he's already contemplating retirement, and I think that the whole COVID landscape has kind of sped that up. We saw in the bubble that Tuukka decided to leave, and while I don't think anybody should hold judgment against Tuukka for that. It was related to family issues. I do still think it goes to show that Tuukka has, maybe more things on his mind than just hockey, and I do respect that. So I honestly think that Tuukka's probably going to end up retiring after playing one more season for Boston, as I think he probably wants to focus more on his family and himself, and I think that, he's allowed to do that. I don't think that anybody should hold a grudge against him for that. That being said, a lot of people still likely are, but I'm still going to, reserve judgment and resentment for doing that. Tuukka Rask has been a great goaltender for the Boston Bruins, and although he's been under a lot of scrutiny, he's always put up good numbers and is one of the best Bruins goaltenders in history. As far as the category goes for the Boston Bruins, I'm going to have to say that they're a contender. Now, this past season, I would have said that they're a cup favorite, and the season before that and that, but the problem is I don't think that their defense is a cup favorite worthy, in all honesty. That defense has really taken a hit this offseason, and if they're able to trade for a guy, they were linked to Noah Hannafin, or sign a guy like Sami Vatanen, that could really upgrade Boston's blue line, but for right now, I think that blue line is so weak, or not like so weak, but I don't think that there's enough depth there to call them a cup favorite. That being said, their forward core is still really great. When you've got a guy like Bergeron and Pastrnak and Marchand, of course you're going to be in the mix as a contender, and then one of the best goaltending tandems in the NHL. So I still think that Boston will end up making the playoffs. I still think that they are a contender, but that being said, I don't think I can call them a cup favorite anymore. This does have a little bit of a one last run feel for the Boston Bruins, but unfortunately for them, I'm not sure if I see a Stanley Cup with this core anymore. They have had great runs with this team, obviously in 2019, and then way back in 2011 actually winning the Stanley Cup. So this has been a great team for the Boston Bruins, and one of the best regular season teams in the NHL throughout the past decade. But it looks like time is kind of winding down. Guys like Pastrnak and Jake DeBrusk are going to be able to carry the Bruins into the next generation of success, but we could be looking at a mini retool or rebuild for Boston within the coming years. Marchand is older, Bergeron is older, some of these guys are older, and I get, they do have young pieces like McAvoy, but they need to work on that defense, and they need to get some more youth in that lineup. Especially when you look at their goaltending, I don't know who succeeds Tuukka Rask or Jaroslav Halak. I know Vlader has been slated as the next guy, but I'm unsure of his potential to be a true starter. But that does it for today's video. I appreciate you guys watching till the end. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys later. Bye for now.